the vast winter plains stretching endlessly beneath a sky the color of hammered iron, and the world feels frozen in a single breath, as if the land itself has forgotten how to move forward, and the cold winds sweep across the open space with a harshness that grinds into bone and spirit alike. And in this unforgiving wilderness rides Lena Harwood, a young frontier woman who has already known more hardship than comfort, yet she keeps pushing forward because she believes survival is carved not from strength alone, but from stubborn will and love that demand sacrifice. The storm begins without warning, as if the sky suddenly decides to pour its anger down, and Lena feels the first sharp gust slap against her face like a warning from nature itself. But she cannot turn back, for she left her small cabin at sunrise hoping to reach the distant trading post before nightfall, because her younger brother lies inside burning with fever, and the only chance he has is the medicine she is determined to fetch, even if the journey demands everything she has left. As the wind gathers strength, Lena realizes the danger she has ridden straight into, but she urges her tired horse forward because she knows she cannot abandon her purpose, and the snow begins to fall with increasing heaviness, blurring the horizon until the path she knew now looks like a blank sheet wiped clean by icy hands, and her horse trembles beneath her, burdened by the rising drifts, but still tries to obey her guidance. After what feels like hours, the storm grows into a full blizzard, and Lena cannot see more than a few steps ahead as the white world swallows all direction, and her body begins to shake inside her worn coat because the cold is reaching her core, and each breath feels like inhaling needles of ice, and she tries to speak to her horse to calm it. Though her voice is stolen by the wind, each word ripped away before it can form a full sound. World tilts when her horse finally collapses into the snow, unable to continue, and Lena falls beside it, feeling the shock of cold biting through her clothing, and she tries to stand, but her legs tremble too much, and she sinks to her knees as fear coils inside her chest, because she has heard stories of travelers lying down in storms like these and never rising again, swallowed by winter without a trace. She gathers her strength and pulls her coat tighter around herself, though her fingers are stiff and losing feeling, and she knows she must think quickly, because every moment wasted in this storm is a moment she moves closer to death, and she thinks of her brother alone in the cabin waiting for her return, and her heart twists painfully because she promised him she would come back, and she refuses to break that promise. But the cold is relentless, and she begins to understand she may not have the strength to walk through this storm. The snow grows deeper around her legs, and the wind howls with a lonely cry as if trying to push her down, and Lena realizes she cannot keep standing because her body is failing, and she feels a strange heaviness behind her eyes, the dangerous pull of sleep that winter whispers into the ears of the lost, and she fights it with every bit of will she has left, whispering her brother's name like a prayer, but her strength flickers like a dying flame. At last she sinks to the ground, unable to resist the weight pressing against her limbs, and she curls into the snow, knowing it is the worst thing she can do, yet feeling she no longer has a choice. And as the storm roars around her, the darkness begins to close in, and Lena believes she will become another forgotten soul claimed by the blizzard, and her final clear thought is a plea that her brother somehow survives without her. And then part one ends with Lena still lying there, believing her life is slipping away without hope, another victim of winter, unseen by any living soul, unaware that someone is walking toward her through the blinding snow, and will refuse to let her story end this way. Lena, half conscious in the snow, as the blizzard continues to tear across the plains and the cold wraps around her like a heavy shroud, and she feels her body sinking deeper into a place between life and death. And in that drifting haze, she cannot tell if the shadow moving toward her is real or some final illusion created by her failing mind, but a part of her still hopes it is real, because hope is the last thing she can cling to. Even when her strength is almost gone, the figure moves with purpose against the roaring wind, and the shape becomes clearer, though Lena can barely focus, and she sees a tall form wrapped in furs, the snow whipping around him as if it tries to push him back, and yet he keeps walking forward with steady steps, and when he finally reaches her, she feels a rough, warm hand grip her arm, pulling her back toward the world she is slipping away from, and the voice that follows is strong, cutting through the storm with a tone that allows no argument. Not this wave. The words strike through the fog surrounding her mind, and Lena blinks up at the stranger, though her lashes are heavy with ice, and she sees the face of an Apache warrior marked with determination and something else she cannot identify, perhaps anger at the storm, perhaps refusal to let another human life be taken by winter, and he repeats the words again more firmly, and Feng Yan. Lena realizes he is not speaking to the wind, but to her. Refusing to let her give in, he lifts her as easily as if she weighs no more than a bundle of hides, and the warmth of his body radiates through the layers of cold that cling to her, and she wants to speak, to ask who he is or why he is helping her. But her lips barely move, and the storm steals her breath each time she tries, and the warrior tightens his hold, knowing she is on the edge of losing consciousness again, and he murmurs something in his own language, a tone soft enough that Lena feels comforted, even if she cannot understand the meaning. The warrior shifts her weight in his arms and begins to move through the storm with steady, sure steps, as if he knows exactly where he is going, and Lena tries to lift her head, but fatigue and cold drag it back down to rest against his chest, and she feels the rhythmic movement of his heart grounding her in the present moment, keeping her from slipping back into the frozen darkness, and though her vision blurs, she senses the shelter of stone rising around them, a narrow rocky hollow protected by an overhang that shields them from the worst of the storm. Warrior lowers her gently to the ground inside the small refuge, then kneels beside her and removes the heavy fur cloak from his own shoulders, placing it over her without hesitation, and despite her weakened state, she feels a rush of protest because he is giving up his warmth, but he ignores her faint attempts to object and moves, quickly gathering dry twigs and stored wood from a hidden cache, as if he has used this place before as a safe haven from the harshness of winter. Lena watches with fading awareness as he builds a fire with practiced skill, striking flint until sparks catch the kindling, and soon a small but fiercely burning flame spreads warmth across the tiny space, and the warrior positions her close enough to the fire to feel the heat soak into her frozen limbs, yet far enough to keep her from burning, and she feels sensation returning painfully in waves as her body slowly begins to thaw. Her teeth chatter uncontrollably, and the warrior kneels close and wraps additional furs around her, and he stays by her side, making sure she does not slip into the dangerous sleep that follows. Freezing, and he speaks again in his deep, steady voice, telling her she is safe here, telling her she must hold on, and Lena senses that this stranger has taken it upon himself to guard her life as if it were his own. Part 2 ends with Lena slowly returning to the world of the living, warmed by fire and by the unexpected strength of the Apache warrior who found her and refused to let her die in the snow, and though she still does not know his name, she already feels that her fate has shifted, because he arrived exactly when she needed him most. The dim shelter where the fire crackles softly, filling the small, rocky hollow with a fragile warmth, and Lena lies wrapped in furs, feeling the ache of returning life in her limbs, and though her body trembles, her mind is slowly clearing, and she becomes aware of the warrior sitting nearby, watching the entrance of the shelter as if guarding against the storm itself, and his presence fills the space with a silent strength that makes her feel strangely safe despite the wildness of the world outside. When she finally manages to lift her head, the warrior turns toward her, and the movement draws her attention to his eyes, dark, steady, and filled with the seriousness of someone who has known many winters and survived them all, and he studies her with a careful gaze as if assessing how close she remains to the edge between life and death, and she tries to speak, but her voice is cracked and faint, and only a soft whisper escapes her lips, yet it is enough to make him lean closer. He asks her a question, his voice calm and firm, wanting to know her name, and Lena answers slowly, forcing the sound past her dry throat, and when she says her name, he repeats it quietly, tasting the shape of it on his tongue and the sound of it spoken in his deep resonant voice makes her feel anchored in a way she has not felt since before the storm began, and she gathers her courage to ask his name in return. He answers with a single word, Taza, and Lena lets the name settle in her memory, feeling it carry weight and history and the quiet authority of someone who moves through the world with purpose, and she thanks him though her voice remains weak, and he shakes his head, telling her she owes him nothing, that life should not be surrendered so easily, especially not in the teeth of a storm that cares nothing for the living. Lena tries to sit up, but dizziness sweeps through her, and Taza reaches out to steady her with one strong hand, and she feels warmth radiating from his touch, stirring an unexpected comfort that pushes back the lingering chill inside her. And he instructs her to move carefully because her body has not yet recovered, and he shifts the furs so she remains close enough to the fire for the heat to reach every part of her. Storm outside continues to rage and the wind screams into the night, but inside the shelter, time feels suspended as if the world beyond the stone walls has stopped spinning, and Lena feels the exhaustion of her journey pressing heavily on her, and Taza breaks the silence by offering her a small piece of dried meat, softened by the heat of the fire, and she hesitates at first, feeling her stomach twist painfully after so long without food, but he encourages her gently, and she forces herself to eat, allowing the nourishment to restore a small measure of strength. As the firelight flickers, Taza begins to speak in short, quiet sentences, sharing that he was traveling alone when he noticed signs of a struggling horse on the trail and followed the tracks until the storm nearly wiped them away, and he arrived only moments before the snow would have covered Lena completely, and she listens with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief, realizing how close she had come to disappearing forever beneath the drifting white. For a moment silence returns, but it is a softer silence now, not filled with fear, but with awareness, and Lena studies Taza more closely, noticing the way he watches the fire and listens to the storm with the patience of someone who has learned to read every sound the land makes, and she feels a question rising within her, a question about why he risked himself to save a stranger when the storm could have claimed him too. When she finally asks, he turns toward her, and for the first time she sees something flicker behind his composed expression, a hint of memory, a shadow that seems older than he is, and he tells her that winter has taken many lives, including one he once tried to save and failed, and he would not allow the storm to claim another if he had the power to stop it. His words settle around them like a vow, and Lena feels a swell of emotion, a blend of gratitude, sorrow, and something unnamed that warms her more deeply than the fire. And part 3 ends with Lena still lying beside the warmth of the flames, her eyes heavy, but her heart steadier, while Taza remains awake and alert, guarding the shelter and by extension guarding her life, determined that the storm will not steal another soul tonight. First faint light of morning creeps over the horizon, and the storm that had raged through the night begins to soften, though the wind still carries sharp gusts that bite at the rocks, and Lena feels the difference immediately, her body no longer trembling with the same intensity as before, and her mind clearer and more aware of the reality surrounding her, and she realizes that the blizzard has passed, but the plains remain dangerous, with snowdrifts hiding deep holes and thin ice over frozen streams, and the risk of falling or becoming trapped is still very real. Taza moves beside her with quiet assurance, his eyes scanning the landscape, even as he gathers furs and checks the remnants of their fire, making sure that nothing from the night threatens their safety, and he speaks to her softly, telling her she must not attempt to walk alone yet, that strength is returning, and with time they will move toward the trading post. And Lena listens, carefully absorbing his instructions and realizing she has never met anyone so attuned to the land and the dangers it holds, and the awareness makes her feel both humbled and grateful, because without him she knows she would have frozen entirely. As the minutes pass, Lena tries to shift her legs, carefully testing her strength, and Taza kneels nearby, ready to support her if she falters, and she notices how methodically he watches her movements, how every gesture is measured and deliberate, and she cannot help but think that a man like this does not exist by chance in the wilderness, but has been shaped by it and hardened by the seasons, and yet there is a gentleness in the way he tends to her needs, a balance between survival and care that surprises her when she finally feels steady enough. Taza helps her to her feet, and she realizes that the act of standing is exhausting yet exhilarating because the world outside no longer seems threatening in the same way, and she feels a flicker of hope rise in her chest as she glimpses the distant ridge where the trading post waits beyond the snow, and the thought of reaching it fills her with determination, though she knows the journey is far from over and that every step must be taken with care. Taza begins to lead her along a path he chooses with skill, tracing the terrain as if memorized from previous travels, and Lena follows, trusting him, completely aware that any misstep could result in disaster, and as they move the wind shifts, bringing new flurries that sting her cheeks and make the snow burn her exposed skin, but Taza adjusts her furs and shields her with his body when necessary, and Lena feels the warmth of his presence as a constant barrier against the cold and against the fear that had gripped her the night before. As they travel, she begins to notice small signs of life. The faint tracks of animals in the snow, the distant cry of a hawk overhead, and she realizes that the land has survived the storm just as she is beginning to survive it too, and she feels a strange connection to the earth around her, as if the struggle against the blizzard has opened her senses to a rhythm of life she had never noticed before. And Taza seems aware of her thoughts, sensing the silent awe in her posture and in the tilt of her head. They pause at a narrow ridge overlooking a frozen creek, and Lena feels the weight of the journey pressing on her once again, and Taza kneels beside her to inspect the safest way down, pointing out unstable ice and hidden drifts, and he demonstrates carefully how to place her feet and balance her body to avoid slipping, and she imitates his movements carefully, trusting his knowledge and feeling a surge of admiration for the quiet competence that radiates from him. Part 4 ends as they continue their cautious descent into the valley below the trading post, still far in the distance, yet visible now in the faint morning light. And Lena realizes that for the first time in hours she feels secure, not only because of her regained strength, but because she has come to rely on Taza completely, and she knows that as long as he remains beside her, the blizzard of the previous night will not define the rest of her journey. Lena and Taza continuing their careful trek across the snowbound plains, and the morning light casts long shadows across the frozen landscape, revealing hidden drifts and patches of ice that could easily swallow an unwary traveler, and Lena feels the cold still clinging to her fingers and toes, yet tempered by the warmth radiating from Taza beside her, and she realizes that without him she would have no hope of crossing the open land that stretches before them. As they walk, Lena begins to speak quietly about her brother, the sick child waiting at home, and Taza listens without interruption, allowing her to share the worry and the love that drives her forward, and she explains how she tried to reach the trading post before the storm and how desperation pushed her beyond caution, and every word she speaks seems to lighten the weight pressing on her chest, because the warrior does not judge but only acknowledges the strength of her determination and the sacrifice she was willing to make. Taza responds with calm authority, telling her that courage alone is never enough to survive the wilderness, and that the land respects skill and knowledge as much as it respects willpower. And Lena listens, absorbing every instruction he gives on navigating snowdrifts, recognizing which ice is safe to step on, how to read the subtle shifts in the wind, and how to conserve energy for long distances and freezing temperatures. And she begins to feel herself learning not only how to survive, but how to move through the wild with intention rather than fear. As the day progresses, the wind grows stronger again, sending sharp gusts across the plains, and Lena leans closer to Taza, feeling the protection of his body as they traverse a narrow ridge where a fall would mean disaster, and she notices the way He watches the terrain ahead and the small signs in the snow that reveal danger long before she can perceive it herself. And she begins to trust not only his guidance but the rhythm of movement he has taught her as they step carefully together. Across the treacherous ground during a short pause, Taza kneels to examine her boots and adjusts the bindings, keeping them secure to prevent frostbite, and he offers her more food and water, and Lena feels a gratitude that goes deeper than words, because he seems to anticipate her every need, even when she herself forgets to speak of it, and the small gestures of care feel monumental in the vast emptiness of the snowbound plains where nothing else exists but cold and wind and the endless white horizon. Lena begins to notice the subtle strength in Taza. Beyond his survival skills, the patience that allows him to endure hours of trudging through snow without complaint, the quiet observation of the land, and the attentiveness he gives to her safety and well-being, and a new awareness rises inside her, realizing that this warrior is not simply a protector, but someone who carries responsibility and compassion in equal measure, and she feels a growing admiration and respect mingled with something she cannot yet name. By late afternoon, they reach a ridge that overlooks a narrow valley where the trading post lies faintly in the distance, and Lena feels a rush of hope and relief mingled with exhaustion, and she realizes the journey is still difficult yet achievable with Taza beside her, and she watches him scan the descent, pointing out hidden dangers, and demonstrates how to place her feet safely across the icy slope, and she follows him carefully step by step, learning more with each movement. Part 5 ends with Lena feeling a deepening connection to Taza beyond gratitude as they descend into the valley, and the trading post finally appears clearer in the distance, and she senses that surviving the blizzard has shifted something inside her, not only giving her life but opening a door to trust, courage, and perhaps the beginning of a bond that neither the storm nor the vast frozen plains could ever erase. Lena and Taza continue down the slope into the valley where the trading post lies faintly in the distance, and the snow crunches under their feet, sending tiny clouds of white into the cold air, and Lena feels her body regaining strength, though every step still demands careful attention, and she notices how Taza moves with absolute confidence, scanning the terrain as if he can read every hidden danger beneath the blanket of snow, and she begins to marvel at the way he blends instinct with experience as they approach a shallow creek frozen over with thin ice. Taza stops abruptly and gestures for Lena to wait, and she watches as he carefully tests the ice with his staff, probing for weak spots, and instructs her exactly where to place her feet when crossing, and she follows his guidance exactly, step by step, feeling the ice shift slightly underfoot but remaining solid enough to hold them both, and she realizes how crucial his knowledge has been, not only to save her life, but to ensure every remaining step through this winter wilderness is deliberate and safe. During a brief pause, Taza speaks to her quietly, telling her that the land is beautiful, but it is not forgiving, and that every storm teaches lessons that must be remembered, and Lena listens carefully, absorbing the weight of his words, and she feels a strange admiration for the quiet way he moves through life, aware of danger yet not dominated by fear, and she begins to see him not only as a protector, but as someone who embodies the very skill and resilience that she aspires to possess. Lena begins to open her heart in small ways, sharing more about her life, her brother, the hardships she has faced, and the loneliness of surviving on the frontier alone, and Taza listens without judgment and offers guidance only when necessary, and she notices that his presence brings a sense of calm she has never felt before, even in the safest cabin or beside a familiar hearth, and she begins to realize that there is a trust forming between them, born out of shared struggle and necessity, and strengthened by his steadfast protection. As they continue their trek toward the trading post, the sun rises higher above the horizon, casting long pale shadows across the snow, and Lena notices the small details she had ignored before: the pattern of animal tracks in the snow, the subtle shift of wind and clouds, and the distant sounds of birds returning with the light, and she begins to feel connected to the land in a way that is both humbling and empowering, and She knows that Taza has been training her awareness without ever speaking of it directly. By mid-afternoon, they reach a narrow ridge above the trading post, and Lena finally sees the small cluster of buildings with smoke rising from chimneys, and she feels a swell of relief and hope mingled with lingering fear because the blizzard could have taken her at any moment. And she looks at Taza, whose dark eyes scan the path ahead, and she notices the faint flicker of a smile as if he is silently acknowledging her survival and determination, and she feels a surge of gratitude stronger than any she has known. Before descending to the post, Taza kneels beside her, adjusting her furs again, ensuring she will be warm enough once inside, and he offers her a small morsel of food, and she takes it gratefully, feeling the warmth spread through her body, and she notices how carefully he tends to every detail, and she understands that this warrior is not only skilled in survival but deeply committed to the lives he touches, and she feels an unspoken bond forming stronger than words could express. Part 6 ends as they begin the careful descent toward the trading post, with Lena leaning on Taza's steady presence and guidance, and the snow begins to glisten in the afternoon sun, and she realizes that the storm that nearly claimed her life has also led her to this moment of trust and connection with someone whose courage and skill have saved her, and she feels that from this point forward, her journey will not be faced alone. Lena and Taza make their final approach to the trading post, a small cluster of wooden buildings rising from the snow like beacons against the pale winter landscape, and Lena feels a mixture of relief and lingering tension because the storm may have passed, but the journey is not yet over, and every step toward the settlement requires careful attention to the icy paths and hidden drifts, and Taza remains close beside her, scanning the ground and the horizon. As if danger might still emerge from the white expanse, the trading post comes into clearer view, and Lena sees movement near the doors and windows, and she realizes that people are going about their daily tasks, oblivious to the nightmarish storm that raged across the plains, and she feels a wave of hope, knowing that the medicine she carries for her brother is within reach, and that the risk she took has not been in vain. And she glances at Taza and notices a quiet pride in the way he watches her navigating the final stretch of snow and ice with his guidance. As they reach the doors of the post, Lena feels her legs tremble from exhaustion, and Taza supports her carefully, ensuring she does not slip on the frozen ground, and she senses the warmth of his presence as more than physical support, a comfort that steadies her nerves and reassures her that the danger is passing. Yet the relief she feels is tempered by the awareness that her life and her brother's health still depend on the next steps she must take inside the building. Taza kneels beside her, speaking softly, telling her to rest for a moment before entering and offering encouragement that steadies her racing heart, and Lena nods her understanding because the moment of pause gives her the strength to gather herself and push through the lingering cold that clings to her bones, and she notices that every action Taza takes is deliberate and measured, ensuring her safety, while also teaching her how to move with care in treacherous conditions, and she feels a growing admiration for his skill and patience. When she finally rises and steps toward the door, Taza walks beside her, shadowing her movements, and she feels a rhythm between them, a silent coordination that has grown from hours of shared struggle in the wilderness. And as they enter the trading post, warmth and light envelop her immediately, and the scent of wood smoke and dried herbs fills the air, and she feels a wave of gratitude and relief so intense that tears prick her eyes, and she realizes how fragile life can be and how much courage it took to survive the blizzard inside the post. Lena finds the medicine she needs, and Taza waits just outside the counter, giving her the space to complete her task, yet remaining close enough to intervene if needed. And she notices how carefully he balances distance and protection, a skill honed over years of navigating danger and human interaction alike, and she feels a deepening respect for him, not only as a warrior but as a guide and protector, and she senses that the bond between them has grown stronger in these hours of shared survival as Lena gathers the medicine and prepares to leave the post. Taza stands beside her, and she notices the subtle vigilance in his posture, as if he is prepared for anything that might threaten them on the return journey, and she feels a warmth in her chest, not only for his protection, but for the understanding that she has found someone who values life as fiercely as she does and who refuses to let her face death. Alone Part 7 ends with Lena stepping back into the cold snow outside the trading post, carrying the precious medicine in her hands, and Taza walking beside her, guiding her down the safest path home, and she feels a new sense of confidence and trust, knowing that the blizzard that almost claimed her life has also brought her to someone whose presence ensures she will not face the harshness of the plains alone, and the journey forward feels daunting yet possible with him by her side. Lena and Taza leave the trading post and begin the careful journey back across the snowbound plains, and the sun hangs low on the horizon, casting long pale shadows that stretch across the drifting snow, and Lena feels a mixture of exhaustion and relief, because she has the medicine her brother needs and she is still alive. Yet she knows the journey is far from over, and every step must be deliberate to avoid hidden ice and deep snow that could swallow them. Taza walks beside her constantly, scanning the terrain, adjusting her pace and the placement of her feet as needed, and Lena feels the steady reassurance of his presence guiding her, with a combination of skill and instinct that she cannot fully comprehend, yet instinctively trusts. And she notices the way he pauses to test the ground before stepping, and gestures for her to follow his example, and she begins to mirror his movements, learning not only to survive the journey, but to move through the winter wilderness with awareness and care. During a brief pause by a frozen stream, Taza kneels to remove some snow that has clung to Lena's boots and furs, and adjusts her clothing to ensure she remains warm and dry, and Lena feels a deepening gratitude for his attentiveness and the subtle way he balances protection with teaching, allowing her to regain strength and confidence with each step, and she begins to understand that survival is not merely about endurance, but about knowledge and trust, and the bond forming between them strengthens with every small gesture as they continue across the plains. Lena speaks quietly about her brother and the cabin where he waits, and Taza listens intently, without interrupting, offering only occasional advice on how to conserve energy and navigate the terrain, and she feels comfort in his patience and the steadiness of his voice, and begins to realize that this warrior is not only skilled at surviving the wild, but deeply aware of the fragility of life and the importance of human connection in ensuring that life continues even in the harshest conditions. The sun dips lower and shadows lengthen as they approach a ridge overlooking the path to Lena's cabin, and she feels a mix of anticipation and worry because the final stretch remains treacherous yet more manageable than the open plains they crossed during the blizzard, and Taza moves with careful precision, checking for hidden ice and weak snowdrifts and guiding her every step, ensuring that the long journey has not been undone by a single misstep, and Lena feels a surge of confidence and trust as she follows his lead. When they pause for a final rest, Taza kneels beside her, speaking softly about the importance of staying alert even as the end of their journey nears, and Lena listens, carefully feeling her heart steady and her mind focused on the path ahead, and she begins to notice the quiet strength and patience in every gesture he makes, and the way he seems to anticipate her needs without being asked, and she feels a growing admiration that is mingled with gratitude and a warmth she does not yet fully understand. As twilight falls, they resume their careful descent toward the cabin, and Lena notices familiar landmarks through the thinning snow and feels hope swelling in her chest, and the sense of isolation that dominated the stormy night begins to lift, and she glances at Taza and realizes that the bond formed in the blizzard has transformed into something unspoken but undeniable. And she senses that she has not only survived the storm, but gained a companion whose presence will remain with her beyond the frozen plains. Part 8 ends with Lena finally seeing the warm glow of her cabin in the distance, and Taza walking steadily beside her, guiding her safely across the last stretch of snow, and she feels a mixture of relief and a new awareness that her survival was never hers alone, and that the connection forged with Taza in the blizzard has altered the course of her life and ensured that she will not face the harshness of the wilderness without support again. Lena and Taza approach the small cabin where her younger brother waits, and the familiar structure rises from the snow like a beacon of warmth and safety. After the long ordeal across the frozen plains, and Lena feels her chest tighten with anticipation and relief because she knows the medicine she carries can save him, and the journey that nearly claimed her life is finally approaching its purpose. Yet she remains aware of the icy ground and treacherous patches that still demand careful steps. Taza walks beside her, guiding her along the safest path across the snow, and Lena notices how every movement he makes is deliberate and protective, and she feels a deepening sense of trust and admiration for the warrior who has walked with her through the blizzard and taught her not only to survive but to navigate the land with awareness and patience, and she realizes that his presence has changed the meaning of the journey, transforming it from a desperate struggle into a shared challenge where hope can flourish. As they reach the cabin, Taza signals for Lena to pause and kneels to inspect the ground near the entrance, ensuring there are no hidden ice patches, and she watches him with gratitude and curiosity, noticing how skilled he is in reading the snow and terrain, and how his focus on her safety extends even to the final steps. Before she reaches the door, and she feels a mixture of awe and relief, knowing that without him she might have fallen or slipped at the very end of her journey. Lena finally opens the door and is greeted by the sight of her brother, pale and weak but alive, and she feels a rush of emotion that catches her off guard, a combination of relief, joy, and lingering fear for the hours he spent alone and suffering. And she kneels beside him, offering the medicine she fought so hard to retrieve, and Taza stands just outside the doorway, watching with quiet vigilance, yet allowing her the space to care for her brother, and she senses the unspoken bond between them strengthened by shared survival and dedication. Her brother's eyes brighten as he takes the medicine, and Lena feels the tension that had gripped her for days slowly release from her shoulders, and Taza steps inside, now offering warmth and assistance, carrying wood for the fire and tending to the small stove, ensuring the cabin is safe and comfortable. And Lena watches him move with a skill and calmness that makes the space feel secure and alive despite the harsh winter still pressing against the windows, and she feels gratitude that cannot be fully expressed in words. Lena takes a moment to look at Taza and realizes that her connection to him has grown beyond survival gratitude and trust, and she senses an emotional bond forged in the blizzard that neither of them can ignore, and she sees in his eyes a quiet acknowledgement of the danger they faced together and a recognition of the courage that brought her to this moment, and she feels her heart stir with feelings she has never allowed herself to entertain before. As evening falls, Taza sits nearby, sharing quiet conversation with Lena while her brother rests, and she notices the gentleness in his voice, the patience in his movements, and the watchfulness in his gaze, and she feels a new kind of comfort knowing that he is not only a protector but a presence she can rely upon beyond the dangers of the wilderness, and she begins to imagine a future where his guidance and companionship continue even after the blizzard is only a memory. Part 9 ends with Lena sitting beside her brother with the cabin warm and safe, and Taza close by, and she feels a deep sense of peace and relief and recognition that the blizzard that once threatened to take her life has also brought her to someone whose presence will shape the coming seasons, and who has shown her that survival is not only about endurance but about connection and trust, and the promise of shared strength in the face of whatever challenges lie ahead. The quiet warmth of Lena's cabin, with her brother resting peacefully and the glow of the fire casting long shadows across the walls, and Lena feels a mixture of relief, gratitude, and an unfamiliar sense of calm, because the storm that threatened to claim her life is now behind her, and she realizes that the presence of Taza beside her has transformed not only her survival but her understanding of trust, companionship, and human connection, and she looks at him with eyes full of unspoken acknowledgement of the bond forged through peril and endurance. Taza sits nearby adjusting furs and tending the small fire with deliberate care, and Lena notices how his every movement balances strength and gentleness, and she feels a deep respect for the man who has walked through the blizzard beside her, teaching her not only the skills to survive, but the awareness and patience to navigate life in a harsh and unforgiving land, and she begins to recognize that the journey they shared has created a connection stronger than fear, stronger than circumstance, and something far deeper than gratitude. As the evening settles, Lena speaks softly to Taza, thanking him for saving her, for guiding her through the storm, and for refusing to allow her life to end in the snow, and she notices the faintest hint of a smile cross his face and the way his dark eyes soften when he looks at her, and she realizes that the bond between them has grown beyond necessity into something emotional, something that carries the weight of shared experience and the quiet understanding that they will not be alone in the future. Taza responds with words measured and steady, telling her that her courage inspired him just as her survival inspired him, and that he would not allow the winter to take her for the same reason he has refused to allow others to suffer when he could intervene. And Lena listens, feeling a warmth spread through her chest, not only from the fire but from the recognition that this man has chosen to stand with her and her brother through the harshest conditions, and she begins to imagine a life where the protection and companionship he offers extends beyond necessity into trust and perhaps even something closer to love. As night deepens, the cabin becomes quiet except for the faint crackle of the fire, and Lena feels a peace she has not known since before the blizzard, and she notices Taza watching her with a protective calm that suggests he will remain with them not out of obligation but because he has chosen to, and she feels a sense of relief and hope, knowing that her life and the life of her brother are secure in ways that extend beyond survival and into the realm of companionship and mutual care. Lena moves closer to Taza, feeling the warmth of his presence, and she realizes that the blizzard that almost claimed her life has also brought her something far more lasting, a bond forged through shared hardship and perseverance, and she senses in herself a new courage to face future challenges, knowing she will not face them alone, and that the lessons learned in the snow and ice will guide her in life with him beside her. Night passes with quiet conversation shared in the warmth of the cabin, with Taza offering advice, care, and companionship, and Lena feeling the strength of a connection she cannot ignore, and she notices the way he blends vigilance with gentleness and protection with respect, and she begins to understand that the journey through the storm has created something enduring and unspoken that will shape the days ahead. Part 10 ends with Lena holding her brother close and Taza nearby, and the three of them safe and warm in the cabin, and she feels a sense of profound gratitude and peace, and she knows that while the blizzard has ended, it has also marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one filled with trust, companionship, and the unwavering presence of someone who refused to let her face death alone, and together they will face whatever winters or trials lie ahead.